Join Time Magazine's lead education reporter alongside global educators and advocates to explore the impacts of teaching forgiveness.
I teach forgiveness because it can have a positive impact in my students' families.
It helps my students thrive in the face of adversity.
Students who can forgive are happier.
Join us, teachers and thought leaders, on how and why to include forgiveness in your classroom.
Temperature rise will bring widespread devastation and unprecedented extreme weather.
New coronavirus cases emerge across the country.
Obesity rates have more than doubled in kids.
Cape Town is running out of water.
All right, welcome everyone to the 2021 World Education Week Conference. We are Camino School, here to present about the importance of active learning, leadership, and innovation to overcome challenges. First of all, we know that you could have chosen to be anywhere at this time, and thus deeply appreciate that you made the choice to be with us this day and time. That being said, we have much to share with you today, so let's get started. My name is Connie Herr, and I'm an educator, advocate, and currently serving on the innovation team at Camino School and Education. I have a background in human development and psychology with a master's from Harvard University. So today I'll be moderating the conversation between Leticia Lyle and Fernando Shayer. Leticia and Fernando are two of the most dynamic, intellectual, and creative people I've had the pleasure to meet and work with in my life. So here's a little bit about Leticia. Really, I can only say a little bit, but Leticia is a founding partner and global chief education officer at Camino Education. One of the many accomplishments of Leticia is that she was the recipient of the Early Career Award from Teachers College, Columbia University, her alma mater. She was also working for social emotional learning programs for low-income students in Brazil. Fernando Shayer is also a founding partner, chairman, and CEO at Camino Education. Before Camino, Fernando was chairman and CEO of Somos Educação. He was also a managing partner and a private equity investor and a partner at the law firm. Talk about juggling multiple tricks. He is currently a Doctor of Education candidate from Johns Hopkins University. So I thought that it would be best to start off by giving our attendees some context. So Leticia, let's wind back a few years and please help us paint a picture of what was going on.
Okay. So, well, hi, Connie. First of all, you're a wonderful host. So thank you for the introduction. Thank you, everyone, for choosing to be here with us. It's wonderful sharing a little bit of the things we've been doing at Camino School, especially. And since the idea was, let's go back a little bit. We found ourselves as partners with other educators thinking about why is it so hard to bring practices that we've seen everywhere and we've seen with research and we've seen that are so relevant to the actual day-to-day of schools. We were thinking about, since we all know that active learning is something meaningful, why are not more schools working with it? Why are we not seeing more social emotional learning or a contextualized education program? Why haven't we seen more teachers being the agents and the producers of knowledge and curriculum? And one of our hypotheses at the time was that we needed to, first of all, especially in Brazil, to show that this type of education that's active, that's project-based, that does focus on an individual's potentiality and everything that is wonderful that comes out from the interaction of students and teachers and a very well thought out curriculum, that we should show it and we should create a proposal that would be visible, especially in Brazil, with a lot of the challenges that Brazil has. So we spent over a year thinking about not only curriculum, but inviting educators that were designing with us the look, the feel, and especially the main principles of this school that would be. And we designed after a lot of workshops. So there was a point that we developed a lot of these ideas, even with children. What is the school of the future? What's the school that you want to be and that you are going to be heard? And from that, we designed 3 main principles at Camino School. We talked about how central relationships are in learning, how we're always learning in relationship, and we would need to make sure that we had time and space and practices for ensuring relationships happen and are valued, that we were going to look for the totality of their experience as human beings, not only how their development is being a part of the world and an individual, but also how we're going to bring in multiple perspectives and more diversity into their day-to-day activities. And also, how are they going to act? We call it authorship, how students will bring the best version of themselves and learn how to reflect and analyze their interaction with the world through that principle. And we designed a whole school around that, not only the architecture, but also the teacher relationships. How do you make sure that you create the conditions for that school to exist? And then, Connie, and I'll leave some of this for my next question. We opened the school, and Brazil school year starts in February, and we opened the school February 10th, 2020. So I think that brings up some of the next chapters, coming up with a lot of those intentions and then being faced with the past 2 years of development. But I think I will get back. That's kind of the context, a little bit about Camino School.
Great, thank you so much, Leticia. So interesting to learn, and really February 2020. Wow, I think everyone can think of how challenging that must have been. So now I have a question for you, Fernando. I'm really curious. It must have been really a journey, and I'm curious, what have you learned through the process of opening Camino School, and Chloe as well?
Yeah, thank you, Connie. It's great to be here. Great to be talking to you and to everyone who's listening. Look, we have been dealing with very uncertain times. I mean, obviously, everything that's happening with the digital revolution and how quickly the habits of our students and our own habits are changing with the introduction of technology and new instructional practices. This is a change, but obviously the pandemic's had a tremendous effect on our planning and what we thought in the beginning would be 2020 and 2021. And I think that what we have learned so far is that in order to learn, you need first to have a learner's mentality. And that's, I think, what we've been trying to keep as close to us as possible. It's one thing to know the answers and to be able to replicate solutions and scale. And it's another to have to deal with uncertain times, with new questions, with new challenges, with a mindset in which you don't necessarily know these answers, but you have to solve these problems. So we have been inviting the parents and the students and our own employees and teachers, who we call caminantes, those who are on the journey with us, camino meaning journey, and to think about these processes together and to find not necessarily true answers, but useful answers, together, things that have a fit at that moment, and that are able to integrate all these different perspectives. So we had to deal in many different circumstances with different opinions. For instance, here in Brazil, at some point, as in other parts of the world, we had to face the question of whether or not we would be opening for face-to-face activities. And obviously, we had some parents who were very much eager to see their kids present in face-to-face activities, and obviously they were tired of managing kids on their own at home for such a long time. But on the other hand, we had other parents and also the educators concerned with what we had to do to deal with the health aspects of this decision. So there is no simple answer to this question, and there's no one single way to address it. And so we decided to focus much more on the process of engaging people in this dialogue, bringing the parents to the conversation as opposed to delivering a one-size-fits-all solution to all of them, inviting the educators to think about this, what we call here, this wicked problem, this problem that doesn't have necessarily one single answer, to think about the various consequences of opening, not opening. And also the students, talking to them about the potential solutions. And so learning is not only something that we are willing to provide an opportunity for students to have, but also ourselves. If we have a learner mentality, we are always open to be more curious. We are, as we say here, using a simple rule that has been applied to us throughout, is how we transform judgment into curiosity, how we decide not to necessarily know the answer, but move from that to questions on what the circumstances are and the various reflexes of these circumstances, and then deciding with the other stakeholders what to do. So this learning process is not necessarily the quickest one, but especially in dealing with complex problems, they seem to be the most effective ones because they're more sustainable. And everyone takes ownership of the solution, as opposed to having people who would be takers as opposed to makers of these journeys, of these ways.
And I think, Connie, if I can add, I think that's the mentality that when we thought about Camino, and was already there, right? We started saying that nothing like the worst case scenario to prove that your predictions were in the right place. And I think that even though we didn't know that there was a pandemic, we knew that there was an issue with education being ready for complex times. And as a school, we needed to present that for partners. So Chloe does take the same view of education to other schools in different conditions, spread across a large spectrum all over the country. And we were able, because of that, because of this preparation and this learner mentality of having, we are used to telling parents, saying that we don't have all the right answers, but we do have good hypotheses. We were able to live, and that's very important. We lived through the pandemic in a different way, and that was something that I think we were able to bring to the day-to-day of Camino School, and also to other schools that were facing the same concerns, but maybe not as ready to deal with complexity.
Amazing. I think what you said about calling your families and staff caminantes and is really amazing, building that community, which segues to the next question. But before, I wanted to quickly comment on how building a school is hard enough, but to do it during a pandemic and to turn the challenges into what I think you both are seeing as opportunities of learning is really fantastic. And it's such an exemplar of exercising that growth mindset that I think Camino School really embraces. And how I think, Fernando, you said that you were giving ownership to the families and students. I don't think that's easy at all, but I think it's really beautiful that it was done that way. And so I think this really perfectly segues to the next question about, I'm curious, how were you able to build, you touched upon it a little bit, but how did you build that trust and community with your new staff, new teachers, new parents, and new students throughout those extremely uncertain times? I think this could be really a great opportunity for many of us to learn from.
So, Connie, I'll tell you a story. It was maybe March 15th. We had just had a lice outbreak in Brazil. The pandemic was, we were seeing this, we were seeing what was happening in other countries that were still, there was still a little bit of denial and carnival, and we still hadn't had a case that was documented in Brazilian soil. But I remember that feeling of you know, we just had a little lice epidemic, and I could see that was just the small wave before the tsunami arrived. And I remember that the day that schools, it was about March 14th, we had opened, February 10th. We all went online, and I remember we were closed for one day, and we asked parents, we said, we're coming back Monday, and we are going to have a hypothesis, and it's not going to be good. Nobody has dealt with a pandemic before. We do not know how to do a hybrid learning model, but we're going to create a proposal. We're going to try, and we know it's going to be tough, and we're going to talk in the end of 2 weeks, and then we'll stop a few days and we'll come back with a different proposal. And I remember saying this in a Zoom call with all the parents, that all of a sudden we all organized Zoom calls, and telling that to the teachers. And we came up with some ideas. We have, like you said, we have a good relationship with academics and teachers that are working currently at Teachers College, for example. We did a series of meetings, and then we came up with a model. And there was not that many that, you know, there were a lot of things that we learned about, even cognitive sciences of how we interact online. But that first week, and we knew it, we decided that we were going to have an hour and a half every day online, every day, with all of our teaching staff. So that was the first thing, was making sure that teachers knew that it was hard, that they didn't know how to do it, that it was okay, but that they were not alone. And I remember one of my main coordinators here, I remember him saying and saying, I can't do it. And we said, you can't do it yet, but we'll figure it out as long as we're asking good questions. And the same thing happened with parents. After a couple of weeks, so this was very intense, we stopped. We listened to everyone, and we came up with a different model, and it was the model that we used throughout a whole year. We did not expect Brazil to be for over a year. Public schools are just coming now over 18 months of kids being away from the classroom. But we didn't know, but we were ready with the good questions. So it was a short moment where listening, especially asking questions and being able to make mistakes or just, you know, not know yet, was really, really important. We had with that beginning, we were able to set, for example, family teacher conferences that were more frequent. We had meetings that were in the beginning of the semester to explain how we were going to do this methodology with all parents. Some parents we weren't able to reach right away. Some parents thought that this was just going to happen really fast, or they were working and there was so much to go around. And with those parents, we reached out and we supported them. We had something that we learned the first week was that we needed to help families organize their access to devices. Some families had devices, some families didn't. Some parents were like, no, my 7-year-old can just use my phone. And then we were like, well, that might not be that easy because they're going to have to spend a lot of time connecting, and that's a different perspective. So we helped them as a school, we helped them organize and make sure that every kid had access to a device. For teachers, what we did is that every day of the week, we continued to make our meetings. So we had a Zoom call with the whole team. So even though that team was brand new, they got to know each other, they got to support each other. We had people coming in from all parts of the world and from different experiences. Psychologists coming in and talking about the science of learning. And every week we had specialists in math and literacy, our partnership with organizations in the United States that were helping us build not only the curriculum, but the model. But those teachers, those expert teachers were here with us discussing specific cases, watching. We were doing one thing that teachers dream, which is to watch teaching practices. It was the first time we got to record, we got to see how learning was actually happening. Not only we worked so on communication, the strengthening of relationships and professional development, we started building our community. So celebrating, I think it's one thing that when we were talking, we were in the introduction, in the T4 introduction, talking about the world's best schools. What is it that makes a community? And making sure that those shared values, here we say that we are kind, we are learners, and we are the school when it looks like us, that those were represented in our curriculum design, even though it was online, that were represented in the way that we were talking to each other. So how we were always modeling kindness. And through our spaces, we have an assembly that is called house gatherings, and we still were able to do it. Students from all different ages were able to connect online and think about projects and how they care for each other and their community. And that was done every week. And those were very powerful. I think that, just to wrap your question, when you say, you know, how do you actually make it happen? There's something that you actually have to do things. You have to have time and space and decide on investing on those actions. And for us, having the simple rules, and maybe I'll give back the microphone to Fernando, having that simple rule of being a learner, of being kind, and being responsible for your own community, and reiterating that in different parts of our ecosystem was very relevant.
Great. Yeah, that's amazing. The piece you talked about, how you had everyday 1-hour meetings to make sure that everyone felt like no one was alone, even during, I think, what was probably the most isolated period of many people's lives, and how you together modeled asking great questions. And I think it really exemplified one of our themes, is how it takes a village, the collaboration, and how you took in different voices. I think that's really inspirational. And this also segues really well into the next question about how you touched on we are the school and it looks like us, and how you had all these small routines. And I think all those really small routines might seem small at the beginning, right? Those 1-hour meetings, but I think it creates big momentum and then high expectations for not only oneself, but also the organization. And I think that eventually that creates some kind of culture. So I would like to ask, I think, Fernando, to talk a little bit more about the core values of Camino School and Education, and the pillars of Camino, and maybe even active learning.
Right. Look, I think that the most important aspects of the experience that we've been having so far is that it's based on interactions in the relationship with all of the different stakeholders. So there is a trap in which schools have fallen, to see themselves as a supplier, as a provider, in a kind of relationship in which parents are consumers or clients, in the more commercial sense, in the sense that the clients are always right and suppliers have to provide, make them happy all the time and have all of the answers. And education is more complex than that. And I think it takes courage on the one hand, but being open on the other, to have a different type of dialogue with the families. That's the starting point. When we invite them to talk about something that's very complex, which is dealing with their kids in an environment that's changing very quickly. And I'm not only referring to the pandemics. I'm talking about the change that's happening in society. I mean, you take a kid today. I have 3 kids, and we have many students here. And I bet that everyone here who's participating has contact with kids now who are much different from what they used to be, say, 5 or 10 years ago. they are living in a physical and digital world, and they all have access to multiple platforms. They're doing many things at the same time. It's Roblox, and it's TikTok, and it's WhatsApp, and it's Party, and it's all of these things combined at one. So it's an experience that designs, that requires a type of interaction with the world that's different from what we had in the past. And so there's a challenge of how to teach these kids. And I believe that design is super important in terms of what's happening in the classroom. Because it's one thing to say that we are engaging these students because they are required to be in school and sitting in the classroom. And the other is to say we are engaging them because they want to be in the school. And more, I think there will be a gap between what students are experiencing outside of the classroom and what they are experiencing in the classroom if schools are not prepared to make the appropriate changes, to design learning experiences that actually communicate something with these kids, meaning create something common with these kids. And so we are very much focused on the pedagogical aspect of the digital revolution. What is it that kids are doing? How do we engage them? And to use this as a central KPI, not only learning. Obviously, learning is, at the end of the day, the most fundamental question that we need to be asking ourselves. Are these kids learning? But there's something that's super important as an index. Are they engaged? And it used to be that schools didn't have to ask that question because kids would be there and parents would just want them to be there. And obviously you'd have half of your classroom just sitting there and doing something else and thinking about something else, but it didn't really matter at the end of the day. It is our feeling here at school, especially after the pandemics, that there is a risk that unless we're able to design learning experiences that are engaging, kids are going to hate school. They're going to hate the experience. Having a kid who's sits in a classroom 4 or 5 hours straight, looking at a teacher who's lecturing about something that has nothing to do with them, with no use of digital technologies, with no activity. They're not being invited to express themselves in the way that they are expressing themselves with, say, TikTok, in a global platform. They're not being invited to be creative in the way that they are creative with their friends in multiple platforms. They're just being invited to sit there and have access to content which is otherwise available almost for free in YouTube. And so it cannot be that this is going to be a meaningful experience or a sustainable solution as a service going forward. So we've been asking ourselves that how can we design pedagogy? How can we design instruction so that at the same time it provides learning and it is engaging? And at the end of the day, kids come back and say, I want to be here. I like this school. I think that this is a place for me to be, not because my parents want me to be here, but because I want to be here. And this is how we foster their relationship with learning, which at the end of the day is going to be more important than knowing the content. Obviously, as everyone here knows, content is changing very, very, very quickly. No one talked about data or dealing with technology 10 years ago in the same way that we are talking about it now. Imagine what it's going to be like in 2030 or 2080 when these kids, retire from their in their professional career. So throughout their lives, their professional lives, their mature lives, they're going to have to be able to integrate new knowledge and new learning experiences every day. And if they hate school and they have a trauma with learning experiences, it's very much probable they're not going to do it. They're going to be saying, this is not for me. I am not able to do it. And so this is something that we want to avoid as a pillar, that we want to invite them to love what they do and find their own solutions as opposed to showing them what to do.
That is so amazing. I had goosebumps. I still have chills. I mean, I completely agree, right? These our students now have their own unique set of challenges, and there's a generational gap. We call them now digital natives, right? And so I think what you said is completely relevant. The design behind learning is super important. And to think about that gap, like you said, Fernando, between what students are uniquely experiencing post 2020, post COVID, versus what has always been done, right? Is it really making any sense anymore? And I think really Camino and Chloe as a platform does such an amazing job with building that relationship with learning, like you said, how to learn and how to be a learner, right? So thank you so much for sharing. I think those are really amazing pillars for us to follow as we continue on in the future with education. So another really important factor that Camino values as we talk about pillars is diversity and inclusion. And I think it's quite, and for me, I think much hasn't been said between active learning and the intersection between diversity and inclusion. And I think Camino has a quite unique stance here in Brazil regarding this topic. So Leticia, if you could talk just a little bit about that and how important that is for Camino.
So I think this is, I'm going to take this question with Fernando. I will take a part of the answer about how students will be engaged or not engaged has to do with the first question when we're talking about diversity and about seeing yourself in what you're studying. I mean, here we're in Brazil, we're talking about Freirean pedagogy and how important it is that we see ourselves in what's relevant and what's being said in school. When we're talking about the young generation of today, they are screaming. They are saying, "I need an education that was thought about me. If it's with my gender, my race, my different needs, or the different way I think, but I want to be a part of education." And right now, this type of education has not thought of who I am. And especially after the pandemic, we've seen this more and more and more. And engagement is one of those factors. But when we're talking about a pedagogy that invites a student to have all the expectations that they should have, because there are lots of things about learning that we should all learn, because they're the basis of future knowledge, and sometimes that student does not know all of that, but also that allows them to show their learning in a different way. That is not talking necessarily that everybody's outputs need to be the same, but that we all want the same outcomes, that we do want students that are coming out into society thinking that the world is their problem and that the world belongs to them and that they are a part of the world. In order to do that, you have to have space and you have to have interactions that allow for those passions to flourish, for that knowledge to be applied, to have real world problems that make sense to them. The way that we designed this at Camino, not only through Chloe, but at Camino School, was what we call expeditions. And basically, they are active learning projects that throughout a longer period of time than just one lesson that you follow step by step what's being dictated in a textbook, for example, you're able to experience, to live through real life problems, to think about guiding questions, to go on a journey, and then to show some of those contexts, conquests with artifacts, and knowing that along the way, it's something that we say that going on a journey, going on a trail, it's not the same thing as just following a trail track. And with that, we've been developing ways of interacting and going along the way and inviting students to bring their own voice to what they're learning. curiously, and then I'm leaving this back to Fernando, it's something that in order to be done, it needs to have a lot of basis and a lot of sustainability. You can go on a hike to Kilimanjaro and you can have a very free experience and have different ideas and bring that learning in a different way, but you're going with an expert guide, you're going into trails that you've thought about, and you're bringing in a lot of that relationship with a mentor, with a guide along the way. So I think that this is something that we've been trying to do that brings, that allows, so that was your question, that allows diversity to even exist and to even be possible in a classroom or in an interaction between teachers and students. The second part is the importance of inclusion. So when you allow and you think that diversity is something relevant, that you need to see everyone and to represent and know that our differences are what makes us stronger, then you're really talking about an inclusive education model that is possible in a school. So we've had some initiatives here, but I think that Fernando can add on to some of that.
Yeah, I think that we've all been learning about inclusion and diversity worldwide. I think one of the things that happened during the pandemic was that this theme became more explicit, more forefront than before. And this is great. And this is part of our learning journey. I think the kids deal with this topic differently from what they used to do. I mean, it's now kids are used to seeing articles and news about a different way of seeing the world, a different way of seeing the other, of having experiences that include other people, and this is phenomenal. But we are still at a stage, I think, in society, and Brazilian society too, where there is a lot of oppression. I mean, this is one of the most oppressive countries in the world. And I think we are change makers. And in order to produce a change, we have to first be very humble and learn. Know that we don't know the answers, but we have to invite the students and the teachers and the parents and talk about this and share. One of the ways that we've been sharing what we are learning here at Camino School is through Chloe. We have a digital platform that we offer to private and public schools in Brazil, and through which we are creating a community of learners, teachers as learners, parents as learners, and learners, obviously students, and in which we are learning to deal with new ways of organizing ourselves. So here in our school, we have a number of inclusion initiatives, and we are also giving, bringing these other schools that are using Chloe together in our community to share what they're doing in inclusion. We think that the most important aspect of this inclusion is how we are ourselves learning. When we invite people who are from not necessarily the same background as our typical students, how much they learn from the realities and the experiences of these other students. And so this is part of the society that we want to build, and that we know that our learners will live in a much more inclusive and much more diverse society. So if part of the function of our school is to be a lab for experiences that these students are going to have in the future, this is something that we want to foster, a place where they're learning from people that have different experiences, as opposed to quote unquote helping them, which is not our mindset. I think that the other aspect here that's super important is how we measure success. And it's part of our success is measured by inclusion and diversity explicitly. This has to be a key index, in the same way as engagement, in the same way as academic performance. And so this is being introduced explicitly in our school, in our dashboards, in the way that we are acting, and that we are inviting schools that use Chloe to think about. For instance, now We say here that we are opening many different Camino schools throughout Brazil, and we're starting, and we don't want to have another school like this one with a building that has the same setting that exists today. We are going to various communities in Brazil, starting here in São Paulo. And our teachers are teaching some of the people who live in these communities how to read and write, using our brand, using our methodology, and inviting these people to, our teachers to do these programs. And in the future, our students to be part of the program. That is how we learn from them, exchange, and that's how we integrate our activities, our pedagogical activities into the larger community.
I think that to add on to that, when Fernando says that inclusion is a way that we measure our success, it's a number of initiatives that will change throughout the years. This year, we were able to hire diversely, and we were able to make sure that we created opportunities for that. We were able to bring in scholarship students in all grade levels, and especially an initiative in race inclusion in Brazil, we are the most the most unequal country currently that we have. We're able to think about other schools. So even Chloe, the fact that Chloe is a platform that can get to so many different places, to public schools, to private schools, is one way that we're going to measure the success and the inclusion. It has to do with knowing, and again, I think that that's one of the values when we say that the totality of our experience. It means that you need me, you need Fernando, you need everyone that's there in different parts of the world. And that's because I can't see totality. I need to be together with other friends, with other educators, with other people who are thinking about the same problem. And that's happening everywhere. It's happening here, it's happening in the United States, it's happening in India. Because when we're talking about humans, classroom, and schools, even though we're so diverse, curiously, we are still doing a lot of the same practices that were created over 200 years ago. And that's what we need to be connected. And that's why we need that totality. That's why inclusion and diversity are not something that you do as a part of a side project. They're the core definition of organizations, of schools that actually get to change the world and get to move the future of education. We need that. We don't need only one voice anymore.
Thank you so much. Well, yes, I think, like Fernando said, one of the many things that the pandemic exposed, I think, is really blatantly the disparities in class, race, gender, and just various intersectional identities. And I think we had the time to reflect on, am I seeing myself in my learning? And like you said, I think kids are really wanting, and you used the word screaming for that. How do I learn about myself when there's nothing about myself in the learning, right? Is there a space for my voice to be heard and respected? And I love how you said that you want to create a space where students feel like the world belongs to them. And Fernando, I think it's super powerful how you used inclusion and diversity as one of the key indexes amongst other critical categories like academic outcomes. And I had another question, but I think we have an even better question in the Q&A chat. So I'm going to ask that one instead, because it's kind of related to my next, well, it's going to be my last question, which was kind of what's next. But we have a participant who so eloquently said it much better than I did. So this attendee asks you, there are learning issues caused by the pandemic are numerous. I understand that you were able to mitigate them during the pandemic, but What changes will be needed to combat and reverse the losses faced during the pandemic for the next school year, when we will potentially go back to normality, whatever normality means now, right? But I think, right, I think we can think about this question and also, you know, what's next for Camino?
Yeah, I think that I'll start here and love to hear your opinion on this. I would tend to answer this in the same way that we did with the pandemics. In the same way that, in the sense that we have to trust the process by which we ask questions and set conditions for the system to deliver the answers, as opposed to having an answer that's ready. I think leadership's role is to set conditions and stand in inquiry. This is the key role that leadership has. And so I would invite the parents, the families, and the learners in each of these. Perhaps the system level will be the classroom. Perhaps it's going to be the school. Perhaps it's going to be the family. But we have to find in each of these, in each case, a solution that is shared by those who are involved. So it may be what we are seeing as patterns is that we have students who are coming back who are by and large less used to dealing with social interactions in a constructive way that they were before. That there are more mental health issues than before. That there is more anxiety in the system, in the school, than before. That does not necessarily mean that we have, because we see patterns throughout these levels or across these levels, that we have a one-size-fits-all solution. We have to go back in each case. In our case, this is what we are doing, going back to each of the learners and the families and the parents and taking the time to not know the answers and finding the hypotheses, learning the facts, again, and going through the what, so what, now what processes that we have here in order to continue to find useful solutions. Not necessarily the true ones, if you will, the absolute ones, but useful solutions for kids who are now getting more used to coming back to school, and for families that are now more used to not spending so much time with their kids, and so forth, right?
And I think, Connie, that I love the question, and I was going to say thank you, because we actually, as Camino School, we lived a very different pandemic. We were very ready. We were open. We saw not only our students deal with mental health issues, with isolation, with gaming, with all of this, but we were so close to them that we were able to have them back and have these parents back, and grow. The school grew during the pandemic. And when you ask us, and the question was, you know, how are we going to look at all of those things that we lost? I think that we lost a lot and we gained a lot. And we're going to continue doing the same thing, which is, how do we see this through better questions? Do we have different questions that we can ask? Right now, what we're doing, and maybe we have two initiatives that we've done. One of them is what we call the Active Learning Leadership Symposium. So we were able to do our first edition, just sharing a lot of our experience. And that wasn't just for me as the principal of the school, or for my pedagogical leaders in instruction and knowledge in assessment, but also what were the operations and the admin and the marketing and the communication things that we had to do and learn as leadership. So we actually did that. We're going to have, there's the next step. So that's, and then Connie can talk more about it, but that's one of the things that we did, which was the process that leadership and that the school has to do is not of coming up with solutions, but making sure that as leaders, we can ask good questions. And we've also, and maybe that's going to sound counterintuitive, but we stuck to the plan of listening. So we are now all teachers are together planning and asking questions and saying what they heard from students, what they heard from parents. We had parent-teacher conferences. Again, even though it was just a month and a half of class, we'll stop again and we'll hear. We have parent meetings in another week where we're gonna continue talking. It's always great when we're able to talk and listen to one another, and we stuck to that. Even though sometimes it was hard, and there was a lot that we were losing, and a feeling that we were not ready, and that there was, you know, a lot of demands from parents, like Fernando was saying. You know, sometimes some parents just forgot that the pandemic happened, and still want to see the same type of learning. And we say, we're not the same type of people. We need to ask better questions. We're still, the pandemic is not through because the pandemic is going to be in us. What are the best questions that schools need to ask, not just because of the pandemic, but just because we live in a connected, volatile and complex world that's full of different people, but full of different dreams and wonderful innovation. So
no, I just wanted to add, I think there's an interesting point when you're talking about a connected world, and you asked about what's next, Connie. And I don't know if I have enough time to talk about this anymore, but I think that we would love that our learners learn together with students that are not here in Brazilian schools only, but as a global community. We want our learners to identify themselves as global citizens. And this requires that they spend time here in school talking to and doing projects and doing things together with students who are sitting in other parts of the world. So we are open to have that type of dialogue with any school that would want to do things together with us, so that we can learn together how to create a global community of schools / learners and develop that skill in our learners.
Amazing. Thank you so much. Wow, an hour is completely not enough to learn all about the amazing accomplishments and trials and tribulations, but I've already put a link in the chat. We would love to, as Leticia said, we are really in the moment of listening and learning, and like Fernando said, expanding our point of view, our vantage. It's going to get even wider for our students and our teachers internationally and globally as we raise global citizens here in Brazil. So if you could take just 2 minutes to leave your contact information in the chat, we would love to invite you to the next Active Learning and Leadership Symposium happening this year. With that said, thank you so much, Leticia and Fernando. Thank you everyone behind the scenes, Hanan, Jonathan, Gilberto, everyone behind who worked endlessly to help with this production. Thank you.
Join Time Magazine's lead education reporter alongside global educators and advocates to explore the impacts of teaching forgiveness.
I teach forgiveness because it can have a positive impact in my students.
Yes, my students thrive in the face of adversity.
Students who can forgive are happier.
Join us to hear from teachers and thought leaders how and why to include forgiveness in your classroom.
temperature rise will bring widespread devastation and unprecedented extreme weather.
New coronavirus cases emerge.
Obesity rates have more than doubled in kids.
Cape Town is running out of water.